Welcome to Walking Shoulder to Shoulder Step 12 meeting. It is with much warmth and love that I introduce Izaak, who will be speaking for 30 minutes on our 12th step, which reads, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. This will be followed by a Q&A. And it's over to you now, Izaak. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you everyone being a service. Hi everyone, my name's Izaak. I'm a very grateful recovered addict. Yeah, really good to be here. If anybody's new to Cocaine Anonymous or back with us or struggling or any combination of those things, welcome. Welcome to CA. Welcome to the 12 steps. I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to get into step 12 and I was just sitting with kind of what angle I would like to share on today. And I think just my experience from the time I came into recovery until the present moment today and really my first encounter of CA, my first encounter of recovery is the 12 step. And that's just something that's continued throughout my journey here. I forgot to set my timer 2 seconds. So I'm going to get to step 12, but really quick qualifier. I crashed into CA in the beginning of 2022 in March as the result of a very progressive and very active addiction career. I started using and drinking when I was 11 years old. It progressed very quickly for me, and I was almost on my knees in my early 20s, really. That's when the hospital visits started happening. That's when the overdoses started happening. That's when the seizures and the coming to in strange places and ambulances started to happen. But I still had a bit of fight left in me, and that continued for another half decade of those kind of consequences. And for me, I really love the Who is a CA member reading because it really just describes me. Cocaine was a big problem of mine, but so was pretty much every mind-altering substance that I stumbled across. And you, pretty much from a list, you can name a substance, and I had a bad habit with it and developed, either physical dependency or got some health issues from that substance. And no matter what I try to change or manipulate or rearrange or swap, this illness just got continued to get progressively worse. This abnormal physical reaction to drugs and alcohol got progressively worse. This illness that centers in my thinking got progressively worse, and this human condition that I suffer with got progressively worse to the point where the periods of abstinence, although they became fewer and far between, as I got to, the real end of my active addiction, that those instances of not having a substance got so painful and unbearable, that I avoided it at all costs. I couldn't stand to not have something inside of me that changed the way I felt or changed the way I thought. And so I get to this point where this indescribable helplessness, this indescribable despair, where I can't carry on the way that I'm going anymore, but I can't stop either. And I tried one more period of abstinence on my own willpower, on my own thinking, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't last maybe 10 days, maybe. And our book talks about this, those kind of intervals, although usually brief, tend to end up in a bigger explosion than ever. And that's what happened. It's like the fuse lit and bang, I was off. And although it wasn't externally the worst spree or the worst use up I ever had, internally it just scraped away the last of whatever was inside of me at that point, the last bit of spirit, the last bit of fight, the last bit of anything I could do by myself, and I reached this impossible place. And this is where step 12 comes into play. Um, so I hit this point, and that's at this exact moment I get cornered by two very old friends of mine who aren't in recovery, but they break into my apartment doing a welfare check on me, and they find all sorts of weird substances and empty bottles, and just it was like a crime scene. And they don't know what to do. They're just normal people, right? These are people who will go out and have a couple of drinks or go out and do a couple of keys, and that's it. They're done for the week or the month. And so um they speak to some people on Cocaine Anonymous, and they direct me to them. And so my first interaction with recovery were with a few different people, and they were all working that 12 step. They were talking to this broken human being that had nowhere else to go, and although wanted a way out from where I was, because I could see for the first time I can't do this anymore by myself. I can't stop, I can't carry on. But I was also so scared at the idea of recovery or abstinence or sobriety, because my old ideas around those things were one of substantial pain and discomfort. And I'm so grateful for the people I encountered in those initial conversations, because not only did they give a real adequate representation of this program, but they guided me into diagnosing myself. They shared a little bit of their experience. Although I didn't know it at the time, they either paraphrased or read out little parts of the book that talk about this illness and talk about the first step, and allowed me to really identify myself as an addict. In fact, I remember one phone call, someone called me and I picked up, and the first thing I said is, "Oh, I need help. I'm a drug addict." And they made me slow down. They said, "Okay, wait a second, wait a second. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just look at a few things." And by the end of that conversation, we were both very much satisfied that I was a hopeless drug addict, and that I needed recovery. And then those people redirected me to a group of drug addicts in Bristol, where I live, and they came and picked me up, and they were all working their 12 step. They that went very much out of their way to come collect me from my flat and take me to my first meeting. And over these first few days and weeks, I just continue to be encountered by people who are actively making an effort to work with me and direct me into this new way of living and into this solution, whether that was as simple as making sure I felt welcome at a brand new meeting, or making sure I knew where the next meeting was tomorrow, and if I had a lift there, and if I had a phone number and I was free to go for coffee the next day, and if I knew what the big book was and what sponsorship was and what the 12 steps were. It was just this rapid fire of helpfulness back to back. Every single person I met. And I share this a lot, but it disarmed me. It disarmed me. I'm someone who the root of my problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, and I've been driven for a very long time operating under what can I get, what can I take, and then I'm just met by person after person after person with whom that not only had the problem been solved, but their sole intention in this interaction is to give something, is to help. And there was some meaning to it, and there was light behind their eyes, and there was a gentleness and a stillness. And I remember in those early days feeling a lot of guilt. I never felt guilt about taking things before, but for some reason I felt some guilt around these people helping me, like I wasn't worthy. And I remember going when I went through the book for the first time with my first sponsor after our very early on in the work, second or third session, as I was walking out of his flat, I apologized to him for taking up his time. It was quite a long session that day, 2 and a bit hours. And he stopped me from leaving when I apologized, and he sat me down and he said, "Izaak, I want you to know what we're doing here is helping me more than it's helping you. So you never need to apologize for the time we spent together reading this book." And I thought he was just being nice, I thought he was being polite. He was a nice guy. And I look back on it with the experience I continue to have in step 12 today. And not only was he definitely telling the truth because that this is the case. You know, this practice of being able to be useful to other people, it feeds my spirit. But it also it really he was really telling the truth. I was his first sponsee. He was a year sober. And so he was finding his footing with taking people through the work and his own recovery and his own practice in the 12 step. And it was, I've been looking back recently at that first experience through the steps really fondly. Not that I ever looked at it from a negative lens, but just it was really beautiful. These two guys, relatively, well, I was brand new, and this other guy, relatively new to recovery, you know, getting into the meat and bones of this work together and discovering different parts of the book and what they're saying and getting excited about it. And you know, he listened to my fifth step. He guided me into a thorough ninth step process, and I'm personally someone who got personally am someone who got taken through the work quite quickly. And so we get through the first 164 pages of this book, and then my sponsor goes, right, you got to go work with others now. And he made this very clear from the start, you know, this program is free, but there's a condition. I'll take you through this work if you then carry the message to other people once you're done. But when he sprung it on me, suddenly I froze up. Like, oh, but I'm not ready. I'm gonna kill someone. Blah blah blah. Just discomfort around it. And he really simplified it of one, you don't have the power to do that to anyone, and two, you're just sitting down and reading the book with them. And all I need to do is be active in not just putting my hand up in a meeting, but actively looking for people that I can be helpful to in whatever capacity that might show itself in. And so I did, and I was about 90 days, and I didn't sit down for the first time and really open the book and for another few months. But this practice of being useful to others, I was able to develop. And in fact, looking back, something I was consistently taught is it doesn't matter how where we are in this journey. If I'm in the rooms, if I'm in the recovery space, if I'm going through the steps at all with someone, I'm in a position where I can be helpful to someone that's come before me. And I've seen it from both sides. I've seen it from myself being able to be useful to others when I was a newcomer, and also when I came in. And the one of the people who helped me the most, and I got the most identification with, was 40 days when I came in, and he was on his fourth step. And he approached me after my third meeting and took my number, and he took me under his wing, and he was someone who looked like me, who used like me, who thinks like me. And I remember thinking, okay, if he can get 40, 45, 50, 55 days, I might just have a chance here. As much as I really love talking to people with lots of time and lots of experience, when I was brand new and very wounded, it was very difficult to picture 5 years, 10 years as a possibility for someone like me. But I could just about wrap my head around 40 days. And then something really interesting happened just after I got taken through the work, which is he relapsed pretty horrendously. And I get a phone call. I was on my way into town, and I get a phone call, and he's in a really, really bad state. He's in some park somewhere. I'm not saying I necessarily did the most sensible thing, but what I did is I went out by myself to try and find him. And I did. I found him in this park, and he's like paralytic. He can barely speak. He's crying. There's carrier bags of alcohol just strewn across the floor, and there's like pocketfuls of different drugs falling out of his pocket. And I sat there, what do I do? I have no idea what to do. I'm way out of my depth here. But I've been taught, you know, practice of pause and going inward at this point. And so I paused and I prayed, and I was given inspiration to go to a specific meeting that was on in about an hour's time. And so I'd like scoop this guy up and chuck him in the back of an Uber, and we get to this meeting, and I'm thinking like, right, okay, there's going to be some old timers there. They'll know what to do with this. I have no idea what I'm doing, and pull him out of the car, and then realize, oh crap, he's got all of his drugs and alcohol still. Okay, we get him out of his pockets and chuck him in a bush outside the meeting, and we pull him into the meeting, and there's some people there who, you know, do have lots of experience with this, and we're able to help this guy, and we're able to getting back to a bed that evening. And I got home that night and I was sat reviewing my day. And that's when it hit me, the acknowledgement of what just happened in that, I don't know, 6 hours of a pretty chaotic day, surrounded by all of my favorite drugs, surrounded by a ridiculous amount of alcohol. The thought to pick up or to use or to drink didn't cross my mind once. In fact, I was so in the moment, it's not something I necessarily realized, but I felt this like protection. There was something driving me in that situation that wasn't me, giving me the right thought or action, directing me to talk to the right person and move to the right thing. And may have not been the most sensible thing diving into that, but our chapter on working with others makes it very clear about the protection we do have when we're on the firing line of life, and that we never need to hesitate going somewhere we can be most helpful. I mean, to quote directly from 102, you should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such an errand. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed. And my only motive in that moment was to help my friend and to help my fellow and my brother. And it was a light bulb moment. So many light bulb moments in this program, right? And reading this book, because the book's written so well and there's so much that jumps out and sounds amazing and is really it's really good to quote because it sounds very profound, and good because it is, but it's one thing me reading this stuff and another thing me experiencing and living it. And that was one of those moments where I started to experience and live in the 12th step. And then over time, I started to have experience of reading through the book with guys and watching people develop their own relationship with their own conception of God and go through profound change by themselves, or by themselves, but with the program. And it's beautiful. And I've made loads of mistakes in the 12 step, trying to be a bit too forceful on people who aren't quite there yet with their admission of powerlessness, um, trying to really convince people that they need to do this, you need to do this, when again it's a conclusion I've found today they need to get to by themselves, that I need to make sure I'm available and visible and there when that willingness is given to them, but I can't force that willingness to them. And if they don't want to stop, I need to turn my thoughts into someone who does want to stop but can't, right? And although our chapter on working with others gives like all of these examples in really good detail, a lot of it I had to experience for myself through trial and error. And I just remember in early recovery, hours long phone calls with people I was trying to convince, who again weren't quite ready there. Um, Getting in self because I was working with people who wouldn't stay with us, and then an elder pointed out to me, the important thing is actively working our 12 step. What happens after that's none of my business, because I'm not God. And some people we work with and they become recovered and they sponsor others and become part of the fellowship we crave, and other people don't. And maybe my job for the people that don't yet is just to plant a seed of solution that they'll get in a month or a year or 10 years or 20 years. I can only look at my side of the street and what my job is, and that's to intensively work with others. It's not to intensively work with others on a predetermined outcome or how I think their recovery needs to be. And when I do, like this step, and I'll speak a little bit soon on practicing this as well in all our affairs, the last part of this step. But when I actively and thoroughly work this 12 step, it does something to me that nothing else quite does in the same way. It gives me perspective, it keeps me humble, it ignites me, it gets me excited. And it shows me how to get out of God's way. An experience that comes to mind. There was a guy, a young guy whose number I was given by someone a couple of years ago. They asked me to reach out because he stumbled into a meeting and was in a lot of pain. So I call him and we have a good conversation. And it turns out he's been in recovery before. He's been through the steps before, at least partially. So he's aware of what we do here and he's willing to talk. But by the end of our conversation, it became very clear there's resistance. There's quite a large amount of resistance. And now my best thinking in a situation like that wants to convince him that he needs to do this stuff and he has to listen to me because don't you know I know what it's like. I've been where you are and you have to do this. You have to do what I'm doing right now. But I was able to pause and just let him speak. And he was able to be really honest with himself and he said, you know what, I'm not quite done yet. I see what I need to do, but I'm not quite done yet. And so instead of trying to force my thinking onto him, I just said, okay, well, you have my number and I'm not planning on going anywhere. So if that ever changes for you, please give me a call and I'd love to continue this conversation. And that was it. And about 6 months later, I get a phone call from this guy and there's something different in his voice. It's the voice that I had when I came to my first meeting. Complete defeat. And he said, I'm done. I really need some help. So great, let's do it. And he's still sober today, and that's no reflection of me in any way. If anything, that's a reflection of me getting out of the way. Because if I'd forced this person to do what I feel like he needed to do in that moment from my thinking, I would have denied him from that very deep, profound first step experience he had with his own powerlessness and with God. And that's one of countless stories and experiences and moments of beauty that this 12 step provides us. And it continues into our chapter revision for you, where we're able through this practice of intensively working with working with others, we get to build this beautiful fellowship, invite more people in, watch other people recover, watch them help others, create the fellowship we crave. And I love it. It's my favorite part of my day by far. It brings me joy, it brings me peace when I can be stuck in self, or I'm maybe not as watching as thoroughly as I could be in my 10th step. It always brings me back to center. There was a few months ago over the summer, there was a really difficult amends that I was procrastinating because it was making I had to face some quite deep rooted stuff in terms of my own defects and some harm that I caused when I was younger. And then suddenly it felt like out of nowhere I had 3 or 4 guys on step 9 and we're reading through interaction and I'm pointing out, oh, well, we must not shrink at anything before God. We need to be thorough with this. And it shone a mirror on my own practical application of this step. And it humbled me. And thanks to those guys, I was able to get the willingness to ask God for help on this difficult amends. And I had a beautiful experience from that difficult amends. Um, I've shared this a lot recently, and I'm not going to go into loads of detail just due to time, but I lost my grandmother in the spring, and it was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. I'm still grieving from it, and I was in a lot of pain yeah, I was in a lot of pain for quite a long time after it happened. But as soon as that experience happened with her, where I was able to help guide her out of this plane, suddenly it was just like one person after another was being presented to me for me to have an experience through the steps with. Just like non-stop, bam, 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 bam. It was like out of nowhere and almost overwhelming. And then I was at my home group, my face-to-face home group on a Monday. It's a book study in Bristol. If you're ever down here, please let me know. We'd love to have you. And one of the elders there, she shared an exact same experience she had with her father. He died in a very similar way while she was present. And as soon as it had happened, she got placed in a really strong place of grief. And as soon as she was in that state, she got presented with an almost silly amount of people to work with. When all else fails, nothing so much ensures immunity as intensive work with other addicts or with other alcoholics. Keeps my feet in the ground, keeps my head in the clouds. And so to anyone who's new or hasn't yet gotten to step 12 or hasn't yet been able to practice this step, I've really found my recovery didn't begin in earnest until I started working this step. And so if you haven't yet gotten to that place, you've got so much ahead of you. You've got so much to look forward to. It's the foundation for me of this stuff. And I find the best practice of this step for me is when it's a little bit inconvenient to me. When maybe I've got, things I can think of like, okay, busy day, sitting down, got my dinner, gonna rot on the sofa and watch some Netflix for a few hours, and then the phone starts buzzing. My life doesn't have to be unmanageable due to the 12 step, but it's good for me to be a little bit inconvenienced. Keeps me on my toes. And all of these tools, right, from step 2 to step 12, inventory, confession, amends, prayer, meditation, working with others, it allows me to be a complete human being in all facets of my life, not just recovery. It's shown me that thinking of others and the giving is the solution to my problem of selfishness and self-centeredness. This attitude change or this personality change that this spiritual awakening provides us allows me to be a better son, employee, housemate, home group member, sponsor, sponsee. And my recovery isn't compartmentalized from other aspects of my life, and other aspects of my life isn't compartmentalized from my recovery. My recovery is my life, and my life is my recovery. I'm not someone who does that perfectly, but when I'm in that oneness thoroughly, everything just flows, even the difficult stuff, even the challenging stuff. That protection that I described with the that friend I was able to help in really early recovery, that's something that continuously crops up. And I've had amends that I've made where in a situation that could possibly be a bit dangerous, there's like dodgy living situations where I have to make an approach to where there's lots of drugs or substances around. And in those situations, because the motive is focused on this program and on my relationship with God, there's this almost like physically prominent separation and that underlying truth that it's not the drink or the drug problem that I need to treat. Like that's the main symptom from my problem, but I need to treat the spirit. And if I treat the spirit through the steps, through actively working with others, through trying to practice this stuff in all my affairs, then there's nothing we need to duck from. There's nothing we need to hide from. We can face life successfully. And Cocaine Anonymous as well. I just want to take a moment of gratitude to this fellowship for teaching me and continuing to teach me the importance and the how and why of practicing the principles of these 12 steps in everything that I do to the best of my abilities, knowing that I'll fall short. Continue to show me how to not only what honesty or integrity looks like, or faith or hope or courage, but how we can apply this stuff in difficult situations in areas of my lives. People who listen to my inventory or able to give guidance on situations where self can pull me into a bit of pain or discomfort. And I mean, you will point me to parts of the book, of course, but you won't just read the words. You'll share lived experience on how to approach this stuff and how to navigate towards God and how to do the right thing and how to admit in the times that I've messed up when it's difficult for me to do so because the ego gets in the way. You show me how to be a complete human being, and everything I have in my life today, internal and external, I owe to Cocaine Anonymous and the 12 steps. I'm out of time. I'll be quiet.
Thank you so much, Isaac. That was amazing. Um, but you're not out of the hot seat yet. We will now open the room for Q&A. Please limit your questions to 2 minutes. You can also post a question in the chat or anonymously to the service team. We especially welcome questions from our newer members. Oh, and Danny, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you so much, Sue. Hi guys, I'm Danny, I'm an addict, and Isaac, thanks so much. What a beautiful, beautiful message that was, and them experiences, when I hear that, it just reminds us why I love doing the 12 step, and how grateful I am for people like you and all the people who have worked that 12 step. My question, you spoke about making mistakes in, when we knew sponsoring, and I've definitely got my fair share. But my question is, Isaac, in working with others, it talks about a man doesn't stop drinking and using as long as he places dependence on people rather than upon God. Have you ever got any experience of making mistakes where maybe you've allowed a sponsee to depend on you as a human power rather than upon God? Thanks, mate.
It's a really good question. Thank you, Danny. The short answer is yes, definitely. What comes to mind is the inventory I did last summer, I think. And it was one of the prominent things that popped up was human dependence, but also this kind of false dependence on sponsor and sponsee. And one of the things in my resentment inventory was sponsees for not following direction. Well, no, I'll be honest, the wording was my sponsees, and when I shared it in my fifth step, my sponsor challenged me on that and said, what about these human beings makes them yours? It forced a pause on me, and it was really eye-opening. And I try to be as conscious as possible today to not stray into that area, and to just simply that part of the book you're talking about, really, really focus on that. The dependence needs to come on your relationship with God. And just a real quick anecdote there, an example of the importance of that. There was a guy I was working with a couple years ago, and as we were going through the work, he was convinced he needed his marriage to be repaired. That was already falling apart before he could have an experience through this work. And so he bowed out at some point in the process, and the marriage 6 months or a year later, the marriage that was falling apart had now officially ended, and he came back. But he almost needed that experience to show him the limitations of human power, and we're no longer working together. But after that happened to him, he had a deep and profound journey through these 12 steps and is still with us today, being a service and building in the fellowship that he lives in.
Thank you, Danny, for your question and Isaac for your answer. Julian, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Sue, and thank you, Isaac, for that beautiful message there on step 12. I have gone through the steps, and this program is absolutely phenomenal, and it's given me my and my family's our and their lives back, and also people around me. And you also touched on you're a better employee, you're a better housemate, and it gives us all these beautiful things. And I'm so grateful for this meeting tonight because step 12 is one that's been worrying me a lot. Actually, it's been kind of mothering me, and I've been wondering, am I doing enough, and how to get these people through the steps, and why aren't they doing this, doing things the right way? And you just touched on that as well. But we're not here to play God, are we? And when they're ready, they're ready. And I need to remember that it's not my it's not my place to own these people or drag them through. When I mean, I was the biggest relapse going, so I should know where this comes from. So my question to you is, how do you deal with this this concern that we get in early sort of sponsorship when sponsees don't sort of, I don't know, I'm going to put this a bit so sounding stupid, but yeah, when they don't do what we want them to do, how do you deal with that? I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. It's not a stupid question at all. What came to mind is the conversation I had in early sponsorship, where it was just what you described, and the person I shared this bit of inventory with said, you know, Isaac, if you take someone through the 12 steps and they have a deep spiritual awakening and they go out there and they sponsor 1,000 people and blah blah blah, that has nothing to do with you. The same way if you you work with someone and try and guide them through the 12 steps and they don't make it and they go back out there, that's nothing to do with you. My responsibility isn't the outcome, it's just to give um an accurate representation of the program as outlined in this book. As long as I'm doing that with my experience, we can't go wrong. And our job isn't the outcome, it's the process of actively working with others.
Thank you, Julian, for your question. Thank you, Isaac. Angela, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Sue, Angela, alcoholic, and thanks, Isaac. I always love listening to you. I love that humility that you have and just that calmness. It's lovely. Anyway, my question is, in step 12, where it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry the message. So has your spiritual awakening changed as you've been carrying this message? Have you seen a change in it? If so, how?
How? Thanks, Angela. It's a really good question. Again, short answer is yes, definitely. Changes day by day, week by week. And what I find helpful for my recovery is just to really try and have an open mind. Again, I need to give an accurate representation of what this program is and what we do. But if I have an open mind, I'm able to do things like listen, and I could be reading the book with a newcomer, and they'll have a perspective of a sentence in the book, and it just hits me. I've never seen it that way before. Wicked. Then I get to share that with the next person. For me, this spiritual awakening, initially, that most important obsession to use being removed and placing me in that position of neutrality, safe and protected. But after that, it's like almost this ever growing and changing and shifting process. Because to me, God's infinite and there's no limitation on the growth when we're tapped into the infinite. I hope that answers your question. Good to see you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Angela, for your question and that beautiful answer. Ollie, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I'm Ollie, I'm a recovered drug addict. Thanks, Isaac. Yeah, thanks for sharing with us. My question is, I was probably more fearful of kind of my first speaking commitment than I was with sponsorship. Has there been a time where you've been in like a lot of fear around speaking, and is there anything you do that to kind of help with that? What's your kind of practice before speaking when you're really nervous? Thanks.
Thanks, Ollie. Love that question. Almost every time. Usually not until like a few minutes before, but then suddenly it's like the yes, I can get this physical apprehension. But one experience I had that I've carried now throughout service is it must have been about 18 months ago. I was asked to speak at this thing in Bristol. There's a specific meeting on a weekend, and it's like one of the biggest. It's like in this huge hall. It's really cool, and it's like three different speakers come up and share, almost like a mini convention. And this fear crept up that I didn't watch for and didn't work a thorough step 10 on. And it suddenly gets to about 10 minutes before, and I've never had this before or after, but I was almost sick because this fear was so strong. I was in the bathroom. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and so I shared inventory. I spoke to my sponsor in the moment, who gave me some really helpful direction, which is in prayer, go up, wherever you're speaking, and before you say anything, look into the crowd and focus on one person there and really look into their eyes and acknowledge the God in them and see that it's the same power that's within you and that there's no separation, there's no difference, you're all the same, no one's better than, no one's worse than, you're meeting on equal ground. And it got me out of the way. I guess more general practices. I always do some form of prayer meditation because otherwise this will start trying to do a good sounding share or what do people need to hear? How can I come across a certain way? And it's it's not about that. As my sponsor continues to say to me, it's never about like sounding good. It's just stepping out of the way and letting spirit do its thing. That's what I try to do today. Thanks for your question.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Is there anyone who feels a bit nervous about asking a question but would like to ask a question? Don't be shy. Michael, would you like to come in?
Hi, thank you, Sue, and thanks all for doing service behind the scenes, and thank you, Izaak, for your share, mate, for your message. I've it's only a couple of times I've heard you now, but you just have this. I don't know what the word is. It's like an integrity or something. It just sort of comes out of you, mate. You're very genuine, and it was a pleasure to hear you. So my question is, do you ever? How do I ask this? So I will try, if possible, not to turn anybody down for sponsorship. Obviously, I'm not Superman and I don't want to overload. But one of the things that tends to be is I have this sort of rule that I'll not sponsor the opposite sex. I was just wondering what your take is. And I've heard it in literature at other meetings, and I hope this is an appropriate question. I've heard it in other meetings, it's suggested that men sponsor men and women sponsor women. I was just wondering, like, what do you have any guidelines around that? I've spoke to other people and some people say they'll not sponsor newcomers, but what's your take on that, mate?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Michael. And I want to preface my answer by saying I'm definitely not an authority on the subject. But what my experience has been, well, my sponsor as of March last year is a woman, Donna J. And so, I wouldn't so far I don't actively, let's say, go out looking for women to sponsor. There was one person I took through the work who was a woman, but before we started going through the process, I sought counsel with my sponsor around it and got guidance. And through our conversation, it deemed like an appropriate thing to do. Um, I guess my answer to simplify it is ensuring that being watchful and considerate. It's easier for me to be considerate of the things I need to be considerate of when I'm working with other men. But I also am of the experience that God will present me with the right people to work with as long as I'm staying in fit spiritual condition. And that applies to all, all people have the privilege of taking through the work. And like yourself, I try to never say no. I try to always be available for sponsorship. If there's ever a capacity issue, I work with a lot of guys who really live this way of life and can guide them to that person for an experience through the steps. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your question and your answer, Izaak. Tim, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Sue. My name's Tim and I'm a recovered addict. Thank you to everyone who's done service on the meeting tonight. Izaak, thank you. Thank you, mate, for your share. Question is this: when dealing with sponsors, people new around, and you're working with them, and there's an obvious resistance to the idea of there being a power greater than them, how have you found it best to approach and tackle that subject with them?
Really good question, Tim. Thank you. And I guess one side of it is I completely get it because I came in with that resistance also. Initially, early on, it used to worry me. Today, I have complete faith in the efficacy of this program and in these 12 steps. And so even if, as long as there's just a willingness that something other than that person can help them, I don't care what it is. If there's just a willingness, that's sufficient. And I've seen beautiful transformations happen because these steps work. I don't need to force a belief on anyone. If someone puts in the action, are honest with themselves and are willing to have an open mind, they'll have an experience despite their best thinking, despite their prejudice. It's what's so beautiful about these 12 steps is it can help anyone from someone who is deeply religious to a very skeptical agnostic like me when I first came in here, and we can both move into a recovered state. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks
Isaac.
thanks very much, Tim and Isaac. Ash, would you like to come in?
Ash, I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for taking the meeting and thank you for your share, Isaac. Been meaning to try and listen to one of your shares for a while. I was recently in a treatment centre in Scarborough, so I spent a lot of time with somebody you might know. Yeah, it's great to hear you, mate, and I appreciate your share. My question is basically I've been in AA for quite a while. I'm sort of new to the whole CA thing. And in AA, you need to have like a year's sobriety to sponsor and do main shares and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, I'm finding out it's a bit different in CA, which is fine, which is great. I think it's great. So what? So yeah. So my question is like, how would you respond to like the not criticism, but like if I am doing a main share or whatever it may be, and I'm speaking to my friends in AA about it, and they're like, oh, you're not ready, blah blah, this sort of stuff. And obviously sponsorship further down the line. Um, what would you sort of say to them? Yeah, if that
Thanks,
makes sense.
no, thank you. It completely makes sense and really good question. I want to be considerate how I answer this. So that rule sounds like it comes from maybe a group of people or meetings. It doesn't come from AA. If we look at AA as the program, there's nowhere in our book that that says anything to do with time limits on working with others. In fact, it says quite the opposite. Ebby Thatcher was 60 days sober when he carried the message to Bill Wilson. And if he hadn't have done that at 60 days sober, no one on this meeting, no one in the 250 plus 12-step fellowships that exist today would be sat sharing experience, strength and hope and recovery. Um, where was I going with that? So yeah, it's not quite an accurate representation of what this program's about. And for someone like me, it was imperative I stay active and working with others from the get-go, and that's what I try and encourage to others. To answer your question, because I did go off on a bit of a tangent there, I don't know if you really need to even say much when pulled up on something like that. You know, one of the most peaceful phrases I find today is just the word okay. Okay. That's your view, that's fine. I don't need to argue with that. Um, their experience may be different to yours or ours, and that's very much okay. There's something really profound and beautiful of watching someone who time-wise is relatively new to recovery, on fire, actively working with others and sharing their experience, strength and hope from the top table. It's inspiring. It was inspiring to me when I came in. And there's people with much more time than I have indicate with this work. These are the 12 steps are tools that we can learn very quickly, but we never like complete them. It's a lifetime of them practicing this stuff and sharpening the tools to be more proficient at it. And if we can't get experience in something we're not practicing, if that makes sense. I went off on a few different tangents there. I apologize. I hope that answers your question, but if not, I'd be happy to have a call with you about that.
Thank you, Ash. Thank you for coming in, and thank you, Isaac. Simon, you had your hand up. Have you got a quick question?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, it is quick as well. I'll be quick. Yeah, so basically, I'm second time round doing the steps now, because I didn't feel ready to sponsor. So my question is to Isaac, how do you approach the new prospects without scaring them away?
Great question, Simon. And just to your first point, I never felt ready. I don't think we ever do until we start doing it. Like, I don't.
Yeah, okay,
The
yeah.
first guy who asked me to sponsor him, my response is, "Oh, I need to ask my sponsor," and I called my sponsor, and he was just like, why are you asking me for? Go out and do it." And then you know you build some comfortability around it. To your question, what without scaring them off. Okay, so what I do personally, say for example, I'm at my home group and we have a time for people to introduce themselves as new, let's say, and I see a couple people I've never seen before and they say that they're new. After the meeting, I don't necessarily jump on them with the big book, but what I will do is have a conversation with them and take their number and ask if they'd like to have a one-on-one conversation in a less kind of loud environment. My home group can get quite excitable. And then if that's something they're willing to do, I'll have a conversation with them or invite them out for coffee and there we can have a gauge of like our book says, you know, get a gauge of what they're drinking and using is like, match our experience to it, introduce ourselves as someone who's recovered from that problem and is this something they'd have some interest in? And they'll either say yes, and in that case we can start looking at what this process will be, or they'll say no, and that's completely fine. You know, we can stay friendly and maybe they'll hear something in the future that guides them into this. Hope that answers your question.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it's been amazing, and thank you so much, Izaak, for your service this evening. It's been